Look at all of you. You are so beautiful, and I am so honored to be able to share my thoughts with you today. I have seen this movement grow from an idea to truly a movement. And standing here looking across this room at all the faces representing countries from all over the world, communities all over the United States, it is one of those moments that makes you feel really good that you're part of philanthropy, which gives you the privilege of being able to partner strategically at the critical times in the birth and development of organizations. So I want you to give yourselves a hand, because you represent something very, very special in this country. I bring you greetings on behalf of the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, our president and CEO, LeJune Montgomery Tabron, over 200 staff, and certainly the program officer that really partners directly and helps to guide the work. Ellen is back home in Battle Creek. So I bring you greetings on behalf of all of them. What I want to share with you this brief time that we have together is some critical insights that we've gleaned about connecting the dots. You hear about the environmental education movement, you hear about equity, you hear about racial equity, you hear about health and well-being. I'm gonna try and weave it all together in a way that gives me comfort anyway, knowing that there is a cloth that can be woven together, that can cover and embrace and warm us all in the knowledge that we are all in this together. So, yesterday, I walked out of my hotel room and I saw a USA Today newspaper headline. I don't know how many of you saw it, but it says, "Police chiefs under fire across the nation." Any of you see this headline yesterday? The subtitle was, "Several pushed from jobs as communities struggle with crises." But when I woke up, at 5 o'clock yesterday morning, I received one of the most disturbing text messages I had ever received. One of my colleagues, a CEO of a major community foundation, an African-American man, his young 20-something-year-old son had been murdered. He had been shot 23 times. And then I juxtapose this headline, "Police chiefs under fire," with the reality of the death of this young man. And I had one of those moments, right, where you know that all the debates about gun control are missing the reality of the life and death circumstances that communities are struggling with every day. Now, most of us who have a high biophilia quotient, who have a deep love for nature, have had some sort of personal journey that brought us to that point of knowing that nature is our balm in Gilead. It is our healing force. And I'll go back and share with you one of my early experiences. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. All right, let's hear it for Cleveland. And I had this scholarship one summer to go up to Chautauqua, New York. Anybody know about Chautauqua, New York? Yes, beautiful place, right? One of the founding impulses for the nation's true gardening movement, in addition to education and literature and arts. And so there I was, one of two people of color in this town for the summer. I was there because of my abilities in art and in music. As an aside, I actually got to share the stage with Paul Robeson. Now, I know some of you have no idea who that is, but for those of you that are old enough, yes, that was certainly a highlight of my life. But it was the first. I was kind of in a cultural shock. It was my first time that far away from home with people who were not like me. And somehow I knew intuitively that I went to the Grove, if I went to this beautiful ravine area that was water and trees and rocks, that somehow every day would be okay. So every morning I would get up around sunrise. It was safe in this little encampment in Chautauqua, New York, and I would go to that ravine and I would just commune with nature. And it really made me okay, right? So another interesting facet of that experience was that my roommate was a white woman from the west side, girl, we were 15, girl from the west side of Cleveland. And Cleveland, like most cities, is very divided, very segregated. And so she had never been around anybody of African-American descent, and I'd never shared a room with anybody that was white. But somehow that disappeared, and we were friends, and we went to breakfast and lunch together, and we shared stories, and you know, it was just a wonderful experience. And then toward the end of the summer, I came home one day, and there was an ambulance in front of our house. And they were bringing her out on a stretcher. And my roommate had attempted suicide. And she left a note in the room, which I read, that said, "I do not want to go home. My father is a police officer, and he has taught me to hate black people. And I now know that's a lie, and I don't want to go home." Now, I don't know what became of her. They never told us. And you and I, all of us who are psychologists or social workers, know there had to be a lot more going on than just that. But that was the message I heard as a young person. I share that story because for me, on my journey, the soothing, healing balm in Gilead of nature has always been juxtaposed with the reality of the trauma and the adversity of racism in America. Now, I never say race, because race is a social construct. It's a real social construct, don't misunderstand me. But my particular spiritual belief system forces me to always go upstream. And for me, the issue we must grapple with is not the consequences, but the belief, the consciousness that gives rise. And that belief is racism. There's a difference between talking about race and dealing with racism. Racism is simply a belief system rooted in the 18th century, when they were creating all manner of taxonomies. Taxonomies, we deal with them in nature all the time, right? There was a taxonomy of the human family also created, a false hierarchy of human value, which says that your value as a human being, literally, is based on how you look. And a big component of that is pigmentation or the lack thereof. And so a whole new world was constructed on that fallacy of a belief in a hierarchy of human value. So when we have these meaningful efforts to bring about equity, it is my heartfelt understanding that what we must uproot is the belief, the false ideology of a hierarchy of human value. Okay. But changing beliefs, that's hard work. And the work of the 21st century is not the same as the work of the 20th century. Oh, there's always a need for direct action. There's always a need for disruption. There's always a need to call attention. I am so proud of the young leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement. They are, thank you. They are learning from the ancestors. Some people think of the civil rights movement and they lump it into Martin Luther King's speech, "I have a dream But it was so much bigger and so much more than that. And there was disruption, and there was people standing up. And actually, it was children who really drew the attention of the nation, who sacrificed. That movement was a foundational experience for how the oppressed and the disadvantaged did stand up for their rights. And every major social movement in this country was built on the formula that was created in the civil rights movement. So when people tell you about how the movement today needs to learn from other movements, and they usually lift up the rapid progress of the LGBT community, and I'm so proud of that progress. But sometimes they forget that movement was modeled after the victories of the civil rights movement. Now, there is a tendency when you're living in a culture that's based on the hierarchy of human value, there is a tendency to minimize all the accomplishments and the leadership and the efforts of those who are at the bottom of that hierarchy. So, in honor of my ancestors, in honor of my sisters and brothers who fought to say to this country, we can change, whenever somebody doesn't give credit to the civil rights movement, I want you to push back a little and remind them that this was a movement that changed America and opened the door for human rights and civil rights movements all over this world to model themselves after. Now, I started to say that this work in this 21st century is different, and I want to talk about unconscious bias, because very few people, except some running for president, are consciously espousing racist kinds of attitudes and beliefs. Very few people are not consciously walking around with those types of mindsets. But what we have been programmed to be, because we are a product of our culture and our society, we have been programmed to be unconsciously biased. Does that make us bad? No, it makes us human. Now, I'll share a quick story with you that illustrates unconscious bias. How many of you are HGTV fans? I know you all don't watch TV, you're all out in nature, but is anybody in this room, okay, a few, right? Well, I watch it because it's the most diverse channel on television, or at least it was, until they got this fetish with the Property Brothers and all the other. But when it first came out, it was the most diverse channel on television. But also because there's no killing yet, you know? You know what I mean? It's not violent, you know, so that's what I watch, right? Purchase 500 channels and watch one, right? But if you watch enough HGTV, guess what? You're going to remodel your house, right? I mean, I believe if you watch enough violence, you're going to be in part of violence, but that's another workshop. Naturally I had to remodel my house, right? And of course, if you're going to remodel your house, you're going to create an open concept. We all know this, right? You're going to take that wall down between the kitchen and the dining room, you're going to have an open concept. But the trick is the wall load bearing, right? That's the big conundrum, right? So I had 5 estimates. 3 people told me it wasn't load bearing, 2 people told me it was, right? So I have a problem. So I watch a few more episodes. I figure out that if I go down in the basement and look up and look at the joist, TV can teach, you know. So I did that, and I figured out it was not load bearing. And so I hired a company that agreed with me. So fast forward to demolition day, and they're there, and they're taking out the cabinets, and they're doing all that good stuff, and there's the point where they're supposed to take the wall down in the kitchen. Now, at this point, I live in the D.C. area, but I work in Michigan, so I have to catch a plane and get back to Michigan, but I stayed for the demolition, and so they were taking the wall down, and the foreman shows up, and he says to the workers on site, he says, "What are you going to do if this wall is load-bearing?" And they say it's not load-bearing. He says, "I know you say that, but what are you going to do if it is," right? Well, that inspires my confidence, right? And so they said, "No, it's not load-bearing." So I go upstairs to grab my suitcases, and because I got to leave and catch a plane. And while I'm upstairs over the kitchen area, my house starts to literally do the Watusi. It is mowing back and forth, and I hear this noise, and I'm thinking, oh, Lord. So I run downstairs. All the workers have run outside. I go, what have you done to my house? And the worker, who was from Guatemala, he says to me, no, ma'am, it's an earthquake. I put my hands on my hips, and I say, what kind of fool do you think I am? We don't have earthquakes in Washington, D.C., and I give him a real piece of my mind. He is so gracious, and he looks at me and he says, no, ma'am, if you go back inside and turn on the TV, it's an earthquake. I'm from Guatemala, and that's an earthquake. What are the chances that the exact moment they decide to take my, right? So I go, and right across the bottom of the screen, it says earthquake 5.5, I think, hits the D.C. area. I am so embarrassed. I go back and I ask this, I have to apologize to this worker, to this Latino worker. I mean, I really have to. But in that moment, and I share this story because in that moment, my unconscious biases came to the surface. I had been raised in a home where there were biases against a perceived other, against the Latino population, and I had internalized those biases. And even though I'd been working on multicultural and diversity work my whole life, in that moment, those biases surfaced. I asked him to forgive me for that. He did a wonderful job on my house, but I share that story when I speak around the country because I want us all to know that none of us are immune. We all carry these beliefs, these stereotypical understandings that come from our environment. Now, I've been told I only have a few more minutes because but I'm gonna, which I rarely do, I'm gonna take more time. Because I think it's terribly important that we understand that this work of bringing about equity of access to nature is fundamentally a part of the racial healing work. It is fundamentally a part of health and well-being. It is fundamentally a part of closing the achievement gaps. It is also a critical component in the wealth inequities that have to change in this country. If I really had more time, I could go and cite studies that connect all those dots. I want you as a movement to understand that while you represent the heart of the movement, the success of the movement depends upon your outreach to all these other communities who will be affected positively by this work. So the public health community has to be here in full force. The education community has to be here in full force. The real estate and the land development communities and the planning community, all of those groups have to be here because this work of protecting and assuring access to nature in its splendor is critically important to the well-being of our children. It is also critically important to the well-being of our planet. This is one of the few movements that can bring together and weave together so much of what is right in terms of creating a future for 7 generations out. So I want you, when you leave here, to sit down and ask yourself, how many others in your networks of influence should be aware of the power of the science, of the research that says getting children, not just children, getting adults into nature helps to change the paradigm. How is it that that's true? If you look at the research, you see that where people have access to natural settings and immersion in nature, where there's a robust tree canopy, you actually have less violence and less crime in those communities. You actually have greater capacities for empathy and caring in those communities. You actually have less incidents of asthma emergency room visits in those communities. you actually have better achievement in schools, and you have less of the behavioral characteristics that are associated with attention deficit disorder. You have so many benefits from this simple, and nobody can patent this. You can't patent exposure to nature. So there's no short-term profit, but there is for many companies that, that are behind giving you the gear to get out in nature, and that's a good thing. But in general, exposure to nature, to natural settings, is absolutely a gift from nature if we align ourselves with that reality. But I think the thread that unites all those multiple benefits has to do with the body's stress response. And being in nature actually elicits what Benson would call the relaxation response. Those of you that are in nature and you love it, when you've been there for a while, everything just calms down. And you feel more aligned with your true self. Some people call it remembered wellness. But that shift in our persona in that space is a healing shift. It is enhancing our immune function. It is enhancing our brain cell function. It's protecting our myelin sheaths of our nervous system. It's reducing our inflammation. It's making us a better person. It's making us a healthier person. And so we talk about the research that we need to do in this field. One of the pieces of research we need to do is to document those physiological responses and those biochemical responses. We need to do that because that is irrefutable. I was thrilled to be asked to be here. I had no idea I'd walk into a room that was this filled with so many diverse faces from all over the world and all over the country. I'm going back to the Kellogg Foundation and ask them to do more to support this movement. I'm also going to the Grant Makers in Health organization and ask them to do more to support this movement, because I know from personal experience that being in nature is a healing force. Now, we're leading a movement at the Kellogg Foundation, and I'm inviting all of you to be partners with us in this effort. We're leading a truth and reconciliation effort for America that we call Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation. America has never faced the truth of its 400-year, 4th-century adherence to a belief in a hierarchy of human value. Now that most of the children that are born in America are children of color, we cannot go forward as a nation without reconciling and transforming that reality. Our children must be born and must grow and thrive in a society that values them equally. And while we're doing that work, we have to put everything in place to mitigate the traumas and the adversity and the challenges that they are exposed to. And one of the things that helps to mitigate that is, of course, a lot of time in natural settings. So it isn't either or, do we change policies, or do we give children healthy nutrition, and do we give them access to nature? It's both and. While we change the policies and we change the structures, we also have to mitigate the effects and the consequences of being exposed to the adversity and to the trauma. It's always a both and if you're really going to bring about real social change. You all are in the both and business. You are holistic by nature. You are creating a way forward. What did you say, Mayor? We have to create another way. You all are creating that way. Now, as I finish, I sound like ministers who say they're going to finish 5 times before they finish, but I'm going to finish for real. I will share one more personal story with you about my appreciation for the ultimate force that nature represents. I, like so many of us in this room, a few of us, am differently abled. I don't like the term disabled, but I am differently abled, and I was born with a challenge that led to multiple surgeries and led to ultimately a compromise in my visual capacity. And after many of those surgeries, I think we were up to about 23, I gave up and I actually prayed for help. Now, at that point, I'm an adult. I'm 25. And in all my life, I'd never actually prayed for help for my eyes. But in the moment where the last surgery hadn't worked and I was in excruciating pain, I found myself desperately praying. Now, Deepak Chopra would call this a peak experience, but I just know what happened, right? So I prayed for help. I cried out for this pain to be relieved and for my sight to be saved. And in that moment, I was impressed in my consciousness as audibly as you all hear my voice now. And the words were simply, "Love your eyes as they are loved." And in that moment, the pain went away. And for the next 25 years, I was completely asymptomatic. But that lesson of loving myself, loving my eyes, learning to love me so that I could extend that love to others, that's been the lesson of my work, that's been the lesson of my career. And in my mind, it is directly connected to the capacity to provide natural settings in which people can thrive and live and realize that they are connected to a force that is all loving and all caring. Thank you.